All right, ready to dive in. Today we're tackling something pretty crucial, and I have to say, a little intimidating. India's judicial system.
Yeah, it's a big one, but don't worry, we'll break it down. No need for law degrees here.
Exactly. We're going for clear and engaging, like always. So, before we get into the nitty-gritty, maybe we could start with like a super basic question. What exactly is the judiciary?
Right, well, think of it this way. You know how we have laws, like the rules of the game?
Yeah, definitely. Gotta have some ground rules.
Well, the judiciary is the referee, the one making sure everyone's playing fair, making sure those rules are followed and applied.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's not just about making laws, it's about, like, making sure they actually work.
Exactly. And a big part of that is resolving disputes. When people have disagreements and need a neutral party to step in.
Oh, right. Like if, let's say you have a disagreement with your landlord.
Exactly. Instead of things getting out of hand, you can take it to court and let the judiciary sort it out fairly.
That makes sense. So it's about keeping things peaceful and making sure everyone gets a fair shot.
Right. And it's not just about resolving conflicts between people. The judiciary also has to make sure the laws themselves are fair.
What do you mean?
Well, what if a law is passed that goes against, say, the Constitution? The judiciary can step in and review that law, and if it's found to be unconstitutional, they can actually strike it down.
Wow. Okay, so they have a lot of power.
They do. It's a huge responsibility. They're not just interpreting laws, they're safeguarding fundamental rights, making sure the system is just for everyone.
That's pretty intense when you think about it.
It is. It's the foundation of a fair and functioning society.
Okay, so let me see if I got this straight. The judiciary is like the referee, making sure everyone plays by the rules, resolving disputes, and even making sure the laws themselves are fair.
You got it.
Now, this raises a question for me. Does that mean anyone can sue anyone else for anything? Like, what if I have a disagreement with my neighbor over, I don't know, a parking space? Can I just haul them to court?
Well, not exactly. It's not quite that simple. While everyone has the right to access the courts, it's not meant for every little disagreement.
Okay, so it's more about, like, serious stuff.
Wow.
Where there's real harm done.
Yeah, generally, the courts deal with matters of, significant importance, where there's a genuine legal issue at stake.
So maybe try talking it out over a cup of tea first before you lawyer up.
Exactly. Now, let's move on to something else that's super important, that independence of the judiciary.
Independence? What do you mean by that?
Well, imagine if judges could be easily influenced by, say, powerful politicians or personal biases. Would you trust the system to be fair?
No, not really. It would feel rigged.
Right. That's why it's so crucial for the judiciary to be independent, free from any outside pressure. And this is where the concept of separation of powers comes in.
The separation of powers.
Yeah. It means that the three branches of government, the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary, they all have their own separate roles and responsibilities.
Okay, so they're like different teams, each with their own job to do.
Exactly, and none of them can interfere with the others. This stops any one branch from becoming too powerful and makes sure the judiciary can make decisions based on the law, not on what someone else wants.
So it's like checks and balances, keeping everyone honest.
Exactly. And to further safeguard that independence, judges are appointed through a very careful process with minimal interference from the government. And once they're appointed, it's incredibly hard to remove them. This means they can make decisions without fear of, losing their jobs.
So it's like giving them the freedom to do what's right, based on the law, without worrying about the consequences.
Precisely. They're not beholden to any political party or individual, which is essential for a fair and just system.
That makes sense. But wouldn't it be better if judges could be removed if they consistently made bad decisions? To hold them accountable.
That's a fair point. It's a delicate balance, right? You want accountability,
Yeah.
but you don't want judges to be swayed by public opinion or political pressure.
So how do you strike that balance?
The process for removing a judge in India is intentionally very difficult. You need strong evidence of serious misconduct. This ensures that the judiciary's integrity is protected and judges can make decisions based on their understanding of the law, not because they're afraid of being removed.
So it's about protecting their ability to be impartial, even if it means it's harder to remove them.
Exactly. Now that we've talked about what the judiciary does and why it's so important for it to be independent, let's talk about how it's actually structured.
Okay, so how does it all fit together?
Think of it like a pyramid. At the bottom, you have the courts that most people interact with, the subordinate or district courts. These courts are all over the country, handling a huge range of
So,
cases.
like, if I got a speeding ticket or had a disagreement with a shopkeeper, that's where I'd end up.
Exactly. They're the first point of contact for most legal matters.
Okay, so what's next on this legal pyramid?
Moving up, we have the high courts. Each state in India has its own high court. They handle appeals from the lower courts and have the authority to review those decisions.
Wait, so there isn't just one high court for the whole country?
Nope. There are 25 high courts, one for each state. This ensures people have access to justice at a higher level without having to travel across the country.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So if you disagree with a lower court's decision, you can take it to the high court.
Exactly. And finally, at the very top of our pyramid, we have the Supreme Court of India.
Ah, the Supreme Court. That's like the big one, huh?
Exactly. It's the highest court in the land. It hears appeals from the high courts and also has the power to decide on matters of national importance.
Okay, so if you don't get the decision you want at the lower courts, you can keep appealing until you reach the Supreme Court.
Well, there are some limitations, but yes, the Supreme Court is generally the final word on legal matters in India, and its decisions are binding on all the lower courts.
So the Supreme Court sets the precedent for how the law is interpreted across the country.
Exactly. So you see, it's a structured system with checks and balances at every level.
This pyramid structure is making things a lot clearer. It's fascinating how everything connects. But I do have a question. Can someone just keep appealing a case all the way to the Supreme Court if they just don't like the decision from the lower courts?
That's a great question. And it's something we'll definitely delve into in more detail when we talk about the appellate system.
Okay, sounds good.
But for now, I think it's a good time to maybe recap what we've covered so far. It's been a lot of information.
Yeah, a quick summary would be great.
All right, so we've established that the judiciary is the guardian of the law, responsible for resolving disputes, making sure laws align with the Constitution, and safeguarding our fundamental rights. It's structured like a pyramid, with district courts, high courts, and the Supreme Court, all working together in a system where higher courts' decisions are binding on lower courts. And most importantly, the Indian judiciary is designed to be independent, free from outside influence, to ensure fairness for everyone. What stands out to you so far?
Honestly, the thing that really sticks out to me is this whole idea of judicial independence. Like, it's the foundation of a fair system, right? Without it, nothing else really matters.
That's a great observation, and it highlights just how crucial the judiciary is in protecting individual rights and ensuring a just society. But there's so much more to explore. Ready to dive deeper?
Absolutely. Bring out the details.
Okay, so remember how we were talking about appeals, how you can challenge a court's decision if you think something went wrong.
Yeah, that was really interesting. Like, how can you be sure justice is served if it's just one judge's opinion, right?
Exactly. That's what the appellate system is all about, providing that safety net, a way to double-check and make sure things are done right.
But how does it work in real life?
Let me tell you about a case that really highlights how the appellate system works. The one about Sudha Goel, who died from burns.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one. Really tragic story.
Absolutely. Her family believed it wasn't an accident, but dowry harassment. They took their case to the trial court, and the court actually found her husband, mother-in-law, and brother-in-law guilty. They were even sentenced to death.
Wow. That's intense.
It is, but, the story doesn't end there. Those convicted, they weren't satisfied with the verdict. They appealed to the high court, arguing that Sudha's death was actually an accident.
So the high court had to look at everything all over again.
Exactly. They reviewed all the evidence, the arguments, the whole 9 yards, and guess what? They overturned the trial court's decision.
Really? So they said all three were innocent?
Yes. The high court concluded that the evidence pointed to an accidental fire, like from a kerosene stove.
Wow. So the same case, but two completely different outcomes. That's kind of crazy.
It is. It shows how legal interpretation can differ, and how appeals allow those different interpretations to be challenged and examined. But hold on, the story gets even more interesting.
Oh, there's more.
There is. You see, this was happening back in the 1980s, a time when there was this growing movement in India against dowry deaths, advocating for women's rights.
Right. So this case was more than just a legal matter. It was tied to a bigger social issue.
Absolutely. And the Indian Federation of Women Lawyers, along with Sudha's family and other women's rights groups, they decided to take the case even further, to the highest court in the land.
You mean the Supreme Court?
Exactly. This really shows how powerful the appellate system can be. It allows even these complex and sensitive cases to be reviewed at the highest level. The Supreme Court looked at everything again, all the evidence, arguments, everything.
Okay, what happened? What did the Supreme Court decide?
Well, they found Sudha's husband and mother-in-law guilty of dowry death.
Wow, so they agreed with the first court?
Well, sort of. They acquitted the brother-in-law, said there wasn't enough evidence, and they sentenced the husband and mother-in-law to life imprisonment, not death.
So a third interpretation of the same case.
Exactly. It really makes you think about what justice actually means, doesn't it?
It does. It's not always black and white, is it?
No, it's not. The Sudha case really highlights how appeals work. They're not just about, winning or losing. They're about ensuring a fair and thorough examination of the law and hopefully a just outcome.
Okay, so we've seen how appeals work in a serious criminal case. But what about more everyday stuff? Like, could I appeal a parking ticket all the way to the Supreme Court?
Well, probably not. There are some safeguards in place to make sure that only the most significant cases get to the Supreme Court. Cases that have wider implications or raise important legal questions.
Okay, so there needs to be a good reason, not just someone being unhappy with a decision.
Exactly. It keeps things manageable so the higher courts can focus on the cases that really matter.
Makes sense. Okay, so appeals are all about ensuring fairness. But how do we decide what happens when someone actually breaks the law? Like, what are the consequences?
That's where we get into the different types of law, like criminal law and civil law. Imagine this, a bunch of kids harassing someone on their way home from school.
Yeah, that's awful. It can have a real impact on someone.
Right. This would fall under criminal law. It deals with acts that are considered harmful to society as a whole. The goal is to punish those who break the law and hopefully prevent others from doing the same.
So criminal law is about protecting everyone.
Exactly. It's about saying, hey, these are the rules, and if you break them, there are consequences. It covers everything from small stuff like traffic violations to serious crimes like assault or theft.
Okay, so what about the situation where, let's say, you're buying a house and the seller just decides not to sell at the last minute, causing you all sorts of problems?
That sounds like a classic breach of contract, and that falls under civil law. Civil law is all about resolving disputes between individuals or organizations.
So it's about personal harm rather than harm to society.
Exactly. It's about resolving conflicts and providing remedies to the person who was wronged. Things like compensation or making sure the contract is fulfilled.
Okay, so criminal law is about punishment, and civil law is about resolving disputes. Is that the basic idea?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
But could there be a situation where both criminal and civil law apply?
Oh, absolutely. Sometimes an action can have both criminal and civil consequences, like imagine someone assaults you.
That's terrible.
It is. In that case, they could be charged with assault, which is a crime, but you could also sue them in civil court for damages, to cover your medical bills and things like that.
So they could face consequences from both sides, the state and the individual they harmed.
Exactly. It ensures that both society's interests and the individual's rights are protected.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so we've talked about how the system works for people who can afford lawyers and all that, but what about people who can't? How do they get access to justice?
That's a really important question. And thankfully, India has a system in place called public interest litigation, or PIL, to try and address that very issue.
PIL, what is that?
Well, think of it as a way for people to fight for justice, even if they can't afford a lawyer or don't know all the legal ins and outs.
Okay, that sounds promising.
It is. PIL allows anyone to file a case in the High Court or Supreme Court, even if they're not directly involved in the issue. So if you see injustice happening, you can step up and fight for what's right.
So it's like a way for ordinary citizens to make a difference, even if they're not lawyers.
Exactly. PIL has been a game changer, especially when it comes to human rights, environmental protection, and social justice issues.
So it's like giving a voice to the voiceless. That's amazing.
It is. And to make PIL even more accessible, the Supreme Court actually relaxed the rules for filing these cases, They even started accepting letters and telegrams as PILs. They recognize that, formal procedures can be a huge barrier to justice.
So they're like, hey, if you see something wrong, just let us know however you can. That's awesome.
Right. It's about making the system work for the people, not the other way around.
I love that.
Yeah.
So this PIL thing, it's not just a nice idea. It's actually been effective. It's led to real change.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
In the early days of PIL, it helped rescue people from bonded labor, where they're forced to work to pay off debts. It also helped free prisoners who were unjustly detained.
Wow. So it's really made a difference in people's lives.
Big time. And one of the most powerful examples of what PIL can achieve is the case that led to the recognition of the right to food in India.
Right to food. Like, that's a basic human right, isn't it?
It is. But it wasn't always recognized as such in India. You see, back in the early 2000s, there were these severe droughts and people were going hungry.
That's awful.
It was. And what was even more shocking was that government warehouses were full of grain just sitting there.
So people were starving while food was rotting. That's insane.
I know, right? It was a picture of inequality and a system that was failing its people.
So what happened?
Well, an organization called the People's Union for Civil Liberties, or PUCL, they filed a PIL in the Supreme Court. They argued that the right to life, which is guaranteed by the Constitution, should include the right to food.
So their argument was, like, you can't really live if you're constantly hungry.
Exactly. And they highlighted the fact that people were starving while food was being wasted. It was a powerful argument, and the Supreme Court agreed.
They did. So they said that the right to food is part of the right to life.
Yes. It was a landmark judgment,
Yeah.
a major victory for social justice. And it didn't stop there. The Supreme Court ordered the government to actually do something about the problem.
So they had to take action. What did they do?
The court ordered them to implement a bunch of measures. They had to create more jobs, make food more affordable, and most importantly, they had to start the midday meal scheme in schools.
Oh, right. The midday meal scheme. I've heard about that. It provides free lunches to school kids.
Exactly. And it's been incredibly successful. It's improved school attendance, reduced dropout rates, and addressed the issue of malnutrition among children. All because of that PIL.
Wow, that's amazing. So PIL isn't just about making noise. It's about getting results, creating real change.
Absolutely. It's a powerful tool for social justice.
Mm-hmm.
But like any tool, it can be misused, right?
Right. I guess anything can be used for the wrong reasons.
Exactly. There's a risk that people might file frivolous PILs, just to harass someone or for personal gain.
So how do we prevent that?
Well, there are ways to identify and dismiss those kinds of cases, and the courts are becoming more aware of this issue.
Okay, good. But there's another problem with PIL we discussed, right?
You mean the potential to overwhelm the courts. You're absolutely right. PILs can contribute to the huge backlog of cases that the Indian judicial system is already struggling with.
Right. That's a big problem. Justice delayed is justice denied, after all.
Exactly. So finding that balance between empowering citizens and ensuring the system can actually function efficiently, that's the key.
Okay, so we've got to be smart about how we use PIL. Make sure it's a force for good without creating more problems.
Exactly. Now, before we move on, let's quickly summarize what PIL is all about. Public interest litigation is a way for any person or organization to file a case in a higher court on behalf of a group whose rights have been violated, even if they aren't directly affected. It's a powerful tool for social change, and it's been instrumental in making India a more just and equitable society.
That's a great summary. It's inspiring to see how people can use the legal system to fight for what's right. But let's not forget about that backlog of cases we mentioned.
Oh, right. That's a huge problem. And it's one of the biggest challenges facing the Indian judicial system today. When people have to wait years, sometimes decades, for their cases to be heard, it erodes trust in the system.
Yeah, it makes it feel like justice is out of reach.
Exactly. And the longer a case drags on, the harder it becomes to get a fair outcome. Evidence can get lost, memories fade, witnesses disappear. It's a real problem.
And it's not just an abstract problem. It affects real people in a very real way.
Absolutely. Take the Hashimpura massacre case, for instance.
The one from 1987, where 42 Muslim men were killed.
That's the one. The families of those victims have been waiting for justice for over 3 decades. The case has been delayed, transferred between courts. It's been a nightmare for them.
That's heartbreaking. It's a clear example of how these delays can deny people justice.
It is. And it highlights the urgency of addressing this backlog. Access to justice isn't just about having the right to go to court. It's about the system being able to deliver justice efficiently and in a timely manner.
So how do we tackle this backlog? It seems like a massive undertaking.
It is, but there are things we can do. One important step is simplifying legal procedures, getting rid of all that unnecessary paperwork and making things more straightforward.
Right, it's like cutting through the red tape.
Exactly. Another key step is promoting alternative methods of resolving disputes, like mediation and arbitration. These are ways for people to settle their differences outside of court with the help of a neutral third party.
So instead of going through this long, drawn-out court process, People can find a solution that works for everyone without all the hassle.
Exactly. And it frees up the courts to focus on the more complex cases that really need their attention.
That's a win-win.
Yeah.
What about technology? Can that help make things more efficient?
Oh, absolutely. Digitizing court records, using online platforms for filing documents, having virtual hearings, all of these things can really speed up the process and make the system more accessible.
It's like bringing the courts into the 21st century.
Exactly. And ultimately, tackling this backlog requires a multi-pronged approach. It's going to take legal reforms, technology upgrades, and a real commitment to strengthening the entire judiciary. It's a tough challenge, but it's one we need to address if we want to make sure justice is truly accessible to everyone.
Okay, so dealing with that backlog is crucial. Now, I want to circle back to something we talked about earlier, the concept of an independent judiciary.
Ah, yes, the cornerstone of a fair legal system.
Just to make sure we're all clear on this, can you give us a concise definition of what an independent judiciary means?
Sure. An independent judiciary means that the courts and judges are free to make decisions based on the law without any pressure or influence from the government, politicians, or anyone else. It's all about impartiality and fairness.
So it's like creating a safe space for the courts to do their job without fear of reprisal.
Exactly. Remember the separation of powers we talked about earlier. That's a big part of ensuring judicial independence. The judiciary needs to be its own separate branch of government with its own powers and responsibilities.
Right, so the legislature makes the laws, the executive enforces them, and the judiciary interprets and applies them. Each branch has its own role.
Precisely. This separation prevents any one branch from becoming too powerful and ensures that the judiciary can act as a check on the other branches.
Okay, so separation of powers is crucial. What else helps to safeguard judicial independence?
The process of appointing judges is also super important. Remember how we talked about how judges are appointed through a really careful process?
Yeah, with minimal interference from the government. Right.
Exactly. And once a judge is appointed, it's really difficult to remove them. They have what's called security of tenure.
So they're not constantly looking over their shoulders, worried about losing their jobs if they make an unpopular decision.
Precisely. This allows them to focus on making decisions based on the law, not on what might please certain people or groups.
So to sum up, an independent judiciary is all about separation of powers, a rigorous appointment process, and security of tenure for judges. These things all work together to create a system where judges can make impartial decisions without fear of outside pressure.
You got it. Now let's move on to another key concept that came up earlier, the appellate system. Can you give us a quick definition of what that is?
Sure. The appellate system is essentially a system of legal checks and balances. It allows people who are dissatisfied with a court's decision to appeal to a higher court for review. It's a way to make sure that judgments are fair and accurate and to correct any errors that might have been made.
So it's like a second chance to get justice.
Exactly. The appellate system is a crucial part of the Indian judicial system, and it plays a vital role in ensuring that justice is served.
And remember, the appellate system in India is structured like a pyramid, with appeals moving from lower courts to higher courts.
Right. We start with the district courts, then move up to the high courts, and finally, the Supreme Court is at the top.
Each level of court has the authority to review the decisions made by the courts below it.
But we also discussed that not every case can be appealed all the way to the Supreme Court. There are filters in place, right?
Yes, there are. To appeal to a higher court, you usually have to show that there was a significant legal error, a procedural mistake, or a clear miscarriage of justice in the lower court's decision.
So it's not just about being unhappy with the outcome. There has to be a valid legal reason to appeal.
Precisely. This ensures that the higher courts can focus on the most important cases and legal issues.
Okay, so the appellate system is about striking that balance between ensuring access to justice and managing the workload of the courts effectively.
Exactly. Now, let's revisit another important distinction we made earlier, the difference between criminal law and civil law.
Oh, yeah, that was really helpful. It's like two different sides of the same coin, right?
Kate could say that. Can you remind us what criminal law is all about?
Criminal law deals with actions that are considered harmful to society as a whole. It's about punishing people who break the law and deterring others from committing crimes.
So it's about maintaining order and protecting the public.
Exactly. It covers a wide range of offenses, from minor things like traffic violations to serious crimes like theft, assault, and murder.
And in these cases, the state, acting through the prosecution, brings the charges against the accused.
And the burden of proof is on the prosecution to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, which is a very high standard.
Right. And the penalties for criminal offenses can be quite severe, including imprisonment, fines, and community service.
Now, what about civil law? How is that different?
Civil law is about resolving disputes between individuals or organizations where one party has allegedly harmed the other. It's about making things right between people.
So instead of focusing on punishment, it's about finding solutions and providing remedies.
Exactly. Civil law covers a wide range of issues, including contracts, property disputes, family matters, and personal injury cases.
And the person who feels they've been wronged, the plaintiff, files a lawsuit against the other party, the defendant.
Right. And the burden of proof in civil cases is lower than in criminal cases. The plaintiff just needs to show that their version of events is more likely than not.
And if they're successful, the court might award them damages, issue an injunction, or order the defendant to fulfill their obligations under a contract.
You got it. So criminal law focuses on punishing wrongdoing and protecting society, while civil law focuses on resolving disputes and providing remedies for harm.
That's a clear distinction. But remember how we talked about situations where an action can trigger both criminal and civil consequences?
Yes. A good example is assault. If someone assaults you, they could face criminal charges, and you could also sue them in civil court for damages.
So they could face punishment from the state and have to compensate the victim for the harm they cause.
Precisely. It ensures that both the interests of society and the rights of the individual are addressed.
Okay, let's bring back another key player in our discussion. Public interest litigation, or PIL.
Ah, yes. The tool that empowers citizens to fight for justice.
Could you give us a concise definition of what PIL is all about and why it's so important?
Of course. PIL is a legal mechanism that allows any individual or organization to file a case in a high court or the Supreme Court on behalf of a group whose rights have been violated, even if they are not directly affected by the issue themselves.
So it's like a way for people to stand up for others who might not have the means or the knowledge to fight for themselves.
Exactly. It's about giving a voice to the voiceless and holding the powerful accountable. PIL has played a vital role in advancing human rights, protecting the environment, and promoting social justice in India.
And remember how we talked about the Supreme Court relaxing the rules for filing PILs, even accepting letters and telegrams as valid PILs?
Yes. They recognized that formal legal procedures could be a barrier for many people, so they made it easier for citizens to approach the court with their concerns.
That's a great example of the judiciary making itself more accessible to the people.
Absolutely. And the right to food case is a perfect illustration of how PIL can bring about real, tangible change.
That case was truly groundbreaking. Can you remind us what made it so significant?
Sure. It started with a situation where millions of people were facing hunger while government warehouses were full of unused grain. The People's Union for Civil Liberties, PUCL, filed a PIL arguing that the right to life, which is a fundamental right guaranteed by the Indian Constitution, should include the right to food.
So their argument was that you can't truly live with dignity if you're constantly battling hunger.
Precisely. And the Supreme Court agreed, ruling that the right to food is an integral part of the right to life. It was a historic judgment that has had a profound impact on food security in India.
And it led to the implementation of the midday meal scheme, which has made a huge difference in the lives of millions of children.
It has. The right to food case is a testament to the power of PIL in bringing about systemic change and upholding the rights of the most vulnerable.
It's an inspiring example of how citizens can use the legal system to make a real difference in society. But we also need to be aware of the challenges associated with PIL, right?
You're right. We discussed the possibility of PIL being misused or abused, and the potential for it to contribute to the already massive backlog of cases in the courts.
So it's about finding that balance between empowering citizens and ensuring that the system can function effectively.
Exactly. It's an ongoing process, and we need to be mindful of both the benefits and the challenges of PIL as we move forward.
Okay, so to sum up, PIL is a powerful tool that allows citizens to file cases in higher courts on behalf of others, even if they're not directly involved in the issue. It's been instrumental in promoting social justice, but we need to be aware of the potential for misuse and the impact it can have on the court system.
That's a great summary. Now, as we wrap up this deep dive into the Indian judicial system, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. Considering everything we've discussed, what do you think are the most pressing issues facing the Indian judicial system today? What needs to change to ensure that justice is truly accessible and equitable for everyone?
That's a really important question. We've explored so much: the structure of the courts, the principles of judicial independence, how appeals work, the differences between criminal and civil law, and the transformative power of PIO. We've also touched upon the challenges of ensuring access to justice for all, particularly for those who are marginalized or disadvantaged. It's clear that the Indian judicial system plays a vital role in upholding the rule of law, protecting our rights, and driving social change, but there's always room for improvement.
Absolutely. We need to continue working towards a more just and equitable society, and that includes strengthening the judiciary's capacity, streamlining legal procedures, and making the justice system more accessible and responsive to the needs of the people.
So as we conclude this deep dive, we encourage you to continue exploring these topics, engaging in conversations, and considering how you can contribute to building a more just and equitable society. We hope this journey has provided you with valuable insights and inspired you to learn more about the Indian judicial system and its impact on all our lives.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground to talk about all the different parts of the Indian judicial system, the challenges it faces, all that. But let's get practical for a second. Imagine our listener is in a situation, maybe a property dispute or something with their family, and they need to deal with the legal system. It can feel pretty overwhelming, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's a common feeling. All those legal terms and procedures, it can be a real maze.
So where do you even begin? What's step one?
Well, the first thing is don't panic. It's easy to get stressed out, but that's not going to help. Take a deep breath and focus on getting the information you need.
Okay, so stay calm. What's next?
Try to figure out exactly what kind of legal issue you're dealing with. Is it a civil matter, like a contract dispute, or is it criminal, where someone's accusing you of breaking the law?
So know which game you're playing, so to speak.
Exactly. Once you have a general idea, the most important thing is to get legal advice. Talk to a lawyer.
Okay, so finding the right lawyer is key. But how do you even do that? There are so many out there.
You can start by asking people you trust if they have any recommendations, friends, family, colleagues. Your local bar association can also help. They have lists of lawyers. And of course, there's always the internet. Lots of resources online.
So do your research. Find someone who specializes in the kind of issue you're facing.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to shop around a little. Meet with a few different lawyers. See who you feel most comfortable with. It's important to have a good rapport with your lawyer to be able to communicate openly and honestly.
Yeah, you got to trust the person who's representing you. So what happens once you've found the right lawyer?
Well, they'll basically become your guide through the whole legal process. They'll explain your rights, your options, the possible outcomes. They'll help you gather evidence, prepare all the necessary documents, and represent you in court if it comes to that.
So they're like your legal translator, helping you navigate this complex system.
Exactly. And remember, don't be afraid to ask questions. The more you understand about what's happening, the better decisions you can make.
Makes sense. But let's face it, lawyers can be expensive. What if you can't afford one?
That's a valid concern, and thankfully, there's help available. India has a system of legal aid services specifically for people who can't afford to hire a lawyer privately.
Oh, that's good to know. So there's a safety net for people who might not be able to afford legal representation otherwise.
Exactly. You can usually find information about legal aid services through your local district legal services authority or through various NGOs that offer legal support.
Okay, so to recap, if you find yourself facing a legal issue, stay calm, figure out what kind of issue it is, get legal advice from a qualified lawyer, and if you can't afford a lawyer, don't worry, there are legal aid services available.
Exactly. And remember, knowledge is power. The more you know about your rights and how the legal system works, the better equipped you'll be to handle whatever comes your way.
This has been a truly eye-opening journey. We've delved into the structure of the Indian judicial system, explored its guiding principles, the challenges it faces, and most importantly, how individuals can navigate this complex world to seek justice. I think the thing that really stands out to me is the constant tension between the ideals of justice and the realities of a complex and often imperfect system.
That's a great point. The Indian judicial system, like any other, is a work in progress. It's constantly evolving, shaped by legal reforms, social movements, and the dedication of countless individuals who are committed to upholding justice and equality.
And it's up to all of us as citizens to engage with this process, to stay informed, to advocate for positive change, and to support those who are seeking justice. It's a collective responsibility, and we all have a part to play in ensuring that the promise of a fair and equitable society becomes a reality for everyone.
Well said. The pursuit of justice is an ongoing journey, and we need to keep moving forward, striving to create a system that truly works for all.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Indian judicial system. We hope it has provided you with valuable insights and inspired you to continue exploring this crucial aspect of our democracy.
Thanks for listening.